They called her the weakest Omega, the one even servants outranked. But the night they tried to kill her, her blood awakened, and the Alpha Council bowed. Because she wasn't just an Omega. Rain fell in cold, relentless sheets, turning the packed earth of the courtyard into dark, clinging mud. The air carried the metallic scent of blood, thick enough to taste, heavy enough to silence even the restless winds that circled the towering stone walls. At the center of it all, she lay crumpled, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of a breath that refused to surrender. Lyra. A name no one spoke with respect, a name that in this pack meant nothing. Her fingers twitched against the soaked ground, nails broken, skin torn, as laughter echoed above her. It was not the laughter of joy or victory, but something far crueler, something sharpened by years of unchecked power and unquestioned hierarchy. Boots shifted around her, circling slowly, deliberately, as though she were nothing more than an object placed there for their amusement. Pathetic, one voice muttered, thick with disdain. Another followed, louder, eager to be heard. Even for an Omega, this is embarrassing. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, just barely, the world around her blurring into streaks of shadow and movement. Pain pulsed through her body in waves, each one stronger than the last, each one threatening to drag her into darkness. Yet something stubborn and unyielding, kept her conscious. She had learned long ago that passing out only made things worse. A boot pressed against her shoulder, forcing her onto her back. Cold rain struck her face, mixing with the blood that traced thin lines from her temple down to her jaw. Above her, silhouettes loomed broad, unmoving, powerful. Alphas, every single one of them. Untouchable. Unquestioned. Until tonight. Look at her, another voice said, almost amused. This is what happens when an Omega forgets her place. A ripple of agreement passed through the circle. No one questioned it. No one ever did. Lyra tried to move, but her body refused to obey. Strength had never been her ally, not in a pack where power determined worth and weakness was treated like a disease. She had spent years enduring their scorn, their commands, their cruelty, learning how to survive in the narrow spaces they allowed her. She had learned when to speak, when to stay silent, when to lower her gaze. Tonight, none of it mattered. A figure stepped forward, and the laughter quieted almost instantly. Authority followed him like a shadow, heavy and suffocating. Even without lifting her head, Lyra knew who it was. She could feel it in the shift of the air, in the way the others straightened, in the sudden, uneasy stillness that replaced their mockery. Kale. The Alpha heir. The one who had looked at her once, just once, and changed everything. Her vision sharpened slightly as he stopped beside her, his expression unreadable beneath the dim, flickering light of the torches. Rain slid down his face, tracing the sharp lines of a man who had never known weakness, never been forced to endure what lay broken at his feet. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, almost as if he were bored, he spoke. It should have ended sooner. The words settled over the courtyard, like a verdict already decided. Lyra's chest tightened, not from the pain, but from something deeper, something older. She had once believed that voice would protect her, that it would recognize her, that it would choose her. She had been wrong. A hand seized her arm, dragging her upward just enough to keep her from slipping back into the mud. Her head lolled forward, wet strands of hair clinging to her face as she struggled to focus. She's still breathing, someone said, almost disappointed. Not for long, another replied. A murmur of approval followed, low and satisfied. Lyra's gaze lifted again, drawn back to Kale. He hadn't moved. He simply watched as though this were nothing more than another routine decision, another insignificant moment in a life filled with power and control. No hesitation. No regret. Whatever fragile hope she had once carried shattered completely. Thunder cracked across the sky, sharp and sudden, and for a brief instant the courtyard was bathed in white light. In that flash, something shifted. Not around her. Within her. It began as a flicker, so faint it could have been mistaken for the last spark of a dying flame. A warmth, buried deep beneath layers of exhaustion and pain, stirred without warning. It did not belong to fear. It did not belong to weakness. It felt ancient. Lyra's breath hitched, her body tensing as the sensation spread, slow at first, then faster, pushing against something inside her that had remained silent her entire life. Her fingers curled against the ground, gripping the mud as though anchoring herself to something real, something solid. "What is she doing?" a voice asked, uncertain now. The shift was subtle, but it was there. The laughter had stopped. Kale's gaze narrowed, just slightly. Lyra lifted her head. Not because she was strong enough, because something refused to let her stay down. The warmth surged, no longer gentle, no longer contained. It moved through her veins like fire, burning away the numbness, the weakness, the years of silence forced upon her. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. For the first time, the pain did not consume her. It fed her. A low sound escaped her throat, not a cry, not a plea, but something raw, something unfamiliar. The ground beneath her trembled faintly, or perhaps it was only her body shaking under the weight of something too powerful to understand. "She should be dead," someone whispered. But she was. Lyra's eyes lifted again, and this time they did not waver. Something in them had changed. The storm above seemed to respond, the wind rising sharply, swirling through the courtyard with sudden force. Torches flickered violently, shadows stretching and twisting along the walls as unease crept into the circle of alphas. One stepped back, then another. Kale did not move, but the tension in his posture sharpened, his attention fixed entirely on the girl who was supposed to have no power, no presence, no future. Lyra pushed herself upward, slowly, deliberately, her body protesting every movement. Blood dripped from her hands, from her arms, from the wounds that should have left her broken. Yet she stood, unsteady, but standing. The silence that followed was no longer filled with mockery. It was filled with something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. "What is she?" someone breathed. Lyra didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because whatever had awakened inside her was no longer asking for permission. And as the first alpha, just one, lowered his gaze, unable to meet hers, the truth began to surface. They hadn't tried to kill the weakest Omega. They had tried to destroy something they were never meant to touch. And now it was waking up. Before that night, before the storm, the blood, and the silence that followed, Lyra existed as something less than invisible. In a pack where strength defined worth, she had been born at the very bottom of a rigid, unforgiving hierarchy. Alphas ruled with unquestioned authority, betas enforced their will, and Omegas endured what was left. Yet even among Omegas, there were ranks, subtle but cruelly enforced. Lyra stood beneath them all, a name spoken only when there was work no one else would touch. She rose before dawn, long before the first patrols returned from the forest, long before the kitchen stirred to life. Her duties were endless, scrubbing stone floors until her hands blistered, hauling water heavy enough to strain her thin frame, cleaning the remnants of feasts she was never allowed to share. The scent of roasted meat would linger in the air, rich and unbearable, while her stomach twisted in quiet protest. Food was not a right for someone like her. It was a reward she rarely earned. Most days she survived on scraps, cold, tasteless, barely enough to keep her standing. And when even that was denied, she learned to silence the hunger, to push it down until it became a dull, constant ache she no longer questioned. No one noticed. Or if they did, they chose not to care. Orders came without pause, voices sharp with impatience, as though her very existence was an inconvenience they tolerated out of habit rather than necessity. Move faster. Don't look at me. Know your place. The words blended together over time, losing individuality, becoming a single, unrelenting reminder of what she was. Less. Lyra obeyed because she had to. Because resistance in a world like this did not lead to change, it led to punishment. and she had seen enough to understand exactly what that meant. There were days when the insults were quieter, delivered with cold indifference instead of open cruelty. Those were the easier ones. It was the public moments that carved the deepest marks, the ones designed not just to remind her of her place, but to ensure everyone else remembered it too. A stumble while carrying water earned laughter that echoed across the courtyard. A delayed response to an alpha's command brought sharp reprimands, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Even standing in the wrong place at the wrong time was enough to draw attention she never wanted. Once she had lifted her gaze by accident, just for a second, just long enough to meet the eyes of someone she shouldn't have. The silence that followed had been immediate, heavy, suffocating. Then came the reprimand, swift and cutting, reminding her that even eye contact was a privilege she did not possess. After that, she learned to keep her head down. Always. Her body reflected the life she lived, thin where others were strong, slower where others moved with effortless power. Her wolf, quiet and distant, offered little in the way of strength or support. It was as though even that part of her had accepted the truth the pack had written for her. Weak. Unimportant. Replaceable. And so, she moved through each day unnoticed unless needed, unheard unless spoken to, existing in the narrow space allowed to her by those above. Until the day everything shifted. It began like any other, orders given, tasks assigned, the familiar rhythm of survival guiding her steps. But there was a tension in the air, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Conversations hushed when she passed. Glances lingered longer than usual, sharp with something she couldn't quite understand. By the time she realized she was the focus of it, it was already too late. The accusations came suddenly, without warning, spoken with a certainty that left no room for defense. Something had gone missing, something important, and somehow, impossibly, the blame had settled on her. An Omega. The lowest of them all. It didn't make sense. But it didn't need to. Truth had never mattered here. Only power. Voices rose around her, louder with each passing second, feeding off one another, building a narrative she couldn't escape. She tried to speak once, just once, but the words never made it past her lips. They were drowned out before they could form, dismissed before they could be heard. No one asked for her side. No one cared to. The decision was made long before she was brought forward, long before she stood in the center of the courtyard with every eye on her, every judgment already decided. And as the weight of it all settled in, as the reality of what was coming began to take shape, one thought pressed through the fear, through the confusion, through the quiet resignation she had carried for so long. This wasn't the worst they could do to her. Not yet. Because her worst humiliation was still coming. The moment they dragged her into the courtyard, Lyra understood this was not about justice. It was spectacle. Torches burned along the stone walls despite the falling rain, their flames hissing as droplets struck them, casting restless shadows across the gathered crowd. The entire pack had been summoned, alphas at the front, betas forming a rigid line behind them, omegas scattered at the edges, careful not to be seen, careful not to be noticed. And at the center of it all stood Lyra. Her wrists were bound, her clothes damp and clinging to her skin, her breathing uneven from the force used to bring her there. Mud stained her legs, her hands, her face. She didn't try to wipe it away. There was no point. A murmur moved through the crowd, low and restless, like something waiting to unfold. Eyes followed her, some filled with curiosity, others with open contempt. No one stepped forward. No one questioned why she was there. Because they already knew. Or at least, they believed they did. Lyra kept her gaze lowered, just as she had been taught, just as she had learned to do to survive. But something felt different. The air was heavier than usual, charged in a way she couldn't explain. It pressed against her skin, seeped into her chest, made her heartbeat stutter in a rhythm that wasn't entirely her own. Then she felt it. A sudden pull. Sharp, unmistakable. Her breath caught, her body going still as something deep within her stirred, not painfully, not violently, but with a quiet intensity that demanded her attention. It spread through her chest, warm and unfamiliar, threading through her veins like something waking after a long, forgotten sleep. Confusion flickered through her mind. She had never felt anything like it before. Around her, the noise of the crowd seemed to dull, fading into the background as that sensation grew stronger, clearer, guiding her attention toward someone, standing just beyond her lowered gaze. Slowly, without thinking, Lyra lifted her head and saw him. Kale. The alpha heir stood at the front of the assembly, unmoving, his presence commanding without effort. Rain traced the sharp lines of his face, dark hair damp against his forehead, eyes fixed on her with a focus that sent that strange warmth surging even stronger through her chest. The moment their gazes met, everything shifted. The world narrowed to a single point, the space between them charged with something undeniable. Lyra's breath faltered as the sensation intensified, wrapping around her thoughts, pulling at something instinctive, something she didn't have words for. Her wolf, usually distant, quiet, stirred for the first time in a way that felt real. Alive. The realization struck her all at once, sudden and overwhelming. Mate. Hope, fragile, unfamiliar, dangerous, rose before she could stop it. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Someone like her, someone who had nothing, who was nothing in the eyes of the pack. How could this be real? But the bond didn't lie. It pulsed between them, steady and certain, anchoring her in a feeling she had never known. For a brief, fleeting moment, the weight of years lifted from her shoulders. The whispers, the hunger, the exhaustion, they all faded beneath something brighter, something that felt like it could change everything. Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something dangerously close to relief. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. A shift in the crowd drew her attention back, the murmurs rising again, louder now, edged with surprise. They had felt it too. Not all of them understood it, but enough did. Eyes turned toward Kale, waiting. Expecting. Because this was not supposed to happen. Not to her. Kale didn't move at first. He simply stood there, his gaze locked on hers, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. For a moment, the silence stretched, heavy with possibility, thick with tension. Lyra held her breath. Waiting. Hopping. Then he stepped forward. The movement was deliberate, controlled, each step measured as he closed the distance between them. The crowd parted without being told, creating a clear path, their attention fixed entirely on what would happen next. Lyra's pulse raced, the bond between them tightening with every step he took, pulling at her, grounding her, making everything feel sharper, clearer. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes as he studied her, not as an equal, not as a mate, but as something he couldn't quite place. Something he didn't want. The warmth in her chest faltered. Just slightly. Confusion crept in, quiet but persistent, as the bond between them shifted, not breaking, not yet, but straining in a way that made her breath catch. Kale, one of the elders said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. You feel it. It wasn't a question. It was a command disguised as expectation. Kale didn't look away from Lyra. For a moment longer, he said nothing, and in that silence, something fragile lingered, something that might have been hesitation, might have been uncertainty. Then it vanished. His expression hardened, the last trace of anything unreadable replaced by something colder, something final. The warmth in Lyra's chest turned sharp. Painful. No, he said. The word cut through the air, quiet but absolute. A ripple moved through the crowd, tension shifting into something else, something anticipatory, something that felt like it was building toward a moment they would remember. Lyra's fingers curled at her sides, her breath unsteady as the bond between them twisted, pulling tight enough to hurt. He took another step back, creating distance, creating space, creating an ending. "I, Kale," he began, his voice clear, unwavering, carrying easily across the courtyard, "reject you as my mate." The words struck harder than any blow. For a second, the world went silent. Then the bond snapped. Not gently, not quietly. It tore. A sharp, searing pain ripped through Lyra's chest, forcing the air from her lungs as her knees threatened to give way beneath her. The warmth that had filled her moments before vanished instantly, replaced by a hollow emptiness so deep it felt endless. Her wolf went still. Completely. Where there had been presence, there was now nothing. No voice. No instinct. No connection. Just silence. A sound broke through it, a laugh sharp and cruel. Then another. And another. The courtyard filled with it, the earlier tension dissolving into open amusement, into satisfaction at a moment that confirmed exactly what they had always believed. An Omega like her could never belong beside an Alpha like him. Lyra stood there, unmoving, the weight of their laughter pressing down on her, threatening to crush what little remained. Her vision blurred, not from the rain, not from the pain, but from something deeper, something that refused to be ignored. She had known rejection before. In 100 small ways, in 1,000 quiet moments. But this was different. This was absolute. Final. There would be no second chance, no hidden truth, no sudden change. Just the echo of his words, repeating over and over in the silence her wolf had left behind. Rejected. A hand shoved her from behind, forcing her forward, forcing her to stumble just enough to draw more laughter, more attention, more humiliation. Even the bond couldn't save her, someone sneered. She should be grateful he even acknowledged it. Lyra didn't respond. She couldn't. Because somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the emptiness, beneath the crushing weight of everything she had just lost, something else stirred. It wasn't hope. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even anger. It was quieter than that. Deeper. And far more dangerous. Because, while the bond had been broken, while her wolf had gone silent, while everything she might have been had been stripped away in front of everyone, something inside her had not shattered. It had not disappeared. It had not surrendered. It waited. The laughter did not fade quickly. It followed her long after the words had been spoken, long after the bond had been torn from her chest, long after Kale turned away as if she no longer existed. It echoed in every corner of the courtyard, clung to the air, pressed into her skin like something that refused to let go. Lyra remained where she stood, barely aware of the movement around her, barely aware of the voices rising once more, not with mockery this time, but with something colder, something more deliberate. Judgment. "Enough," one of the elders said, his voice cutting through the noise with quiet authority. The laughter died down instantly. Lyra's head lifted slightly, not out of defiance, but because something in that tone demanded attention. The circle shifted, alphas stepping forward, their expressions hard, their presence heavy with finality. The accusation came again, clearer this time, spoken so all could hear. She stole from the pack. A lie. Simple, clean, undeniable in the way only power could make it. Lyra's lips parted, the instinct to speak rising again despite everything that had just happened. But the moment she drew breath, the weight of the crowd pressed in, suffocating, reminding her exactly where she stood. No one wanted the truth. They wanted a conclusion. And she had already been chosen. I didn't. The words barely formed before they were cut off. Silence. The command struck like a physical force, sharp enough to halt her voice, strong enough to remind her that she had no right to defend herself. The elder's gaze didn't waver as he looked at her, not with anger, not even with contempt, but with something far worse. Indifference. "You stand accused," he continued, as though she had never spoken, as though her voice had never existed. "And your guilt is clear." A murmur of agreement followed. No hesitation, no doubt. Lyra felt something inside her tighten, not in panic, not in desperation, but in a quiet, hollow understanding. This was never about what she had done. It was about what she was. The weakest. The easiest to remove. A problem no one would miss. The sentence came without delay. "You are to be taken beyond the borders," the elder said, his voice steady, final. "You will not return." A pause. Then softer, but far more dangerous. "You will not survive." No one reacted with shock. No one protested. Because this was how things worked. The pack did not need to stain its hands with blood in the courtyard. There were other ways to ensure someone disappeared. Lyra's breath caught, not from fear, not entirely, but from the weight of what those words meant. The lands beyond the territory were not simply wilderness. They were something else entirely. Unforgiving. Untouched. Deadly. Once you crossed that line, there was no coming back. Hands seized her again, rough and unyielding, dragging her backward before she could steady herself. Her legs struggled to keep up, her body still weak, still reeling from everything that had been torn from her. She didn't fight. There was nothing left to fight with. The gates loomed ahead, massive and silent, separating everything she had ever known from the unknown beyond. Rain continued to fall, heavier now, as though the sky itself was trying to wash the moment away. No one followed. No one watched. By the time she was dragged through the gates, the courtyard behind her had already begun to empty, the pack returning to their lives as though nothing had happened. As though she had never existed. The journey was longer than she expected. Or perhaps it only felt that way because every step drained what little strength remained in her body. The guards spoke little, their grips firm, their movements efficient. This was not punishment to them. It was routine. The deeper they moved into the forest, the darker it became. The trees grew thicker, older, their branches twisting overhead, blocking out what little light remained. The air changed too, heavier, colder, carrying a silence that felt unnatural. Even the rain seemed quieter here. More distant. Lyra stumbled more than once, her feet catching on roots hidden beneath the mud, her body threatening to collapse with every misstep. Each time, she was dragged back up without a word, without hesitation, forced forward again. Until finally, they stopped. "This is far enough." The voice was flat, uninterested. Lyra barely had time to register the words before she was shoved forward, her weakened body unable to catch itself as she fell hard against the ground. Pain flared through her limbs, sharp and immediate, but she didn't cry out. There was no point. Behind her, she heard movement, the shift of boots, the turning away. No final words. No warning. Just departure. The sound of their footsteps faded quickly, swallowed by the forest, until there was nothing left but silence. Lyra lay there for a moment, unmoving, her breath shallow, her body too heavy to lift. The earth beneath her was cold, damp, unwelcoming. The scent of unfamiliar territory filled her lungs, sharp and unsettling. Slowly, she pushed herself up, her arms trembling under the effort. The forest stretched around her, endless and dark, its towering trees standing like silent witnesses. There were no paths, no signs of life, only shadows and the quiet sense that something watched from just beyond her sight. Her chest tightened. Not with panic, with realization. This was where she was meant to die. Not in front of the pack. Not with witnesses. But here. Alone. Forgotten. Lyra drew in a slow breath, steadying herself as best she could. Blood still dripped from her wounds, her strength fading with every passing second. Her wolf remained silent, the emptiness inside her as vast as the forest surrounding her. There was nothing left. No bond. No pack. No place to return to. They didn't just reject her. The thought formed slowly, heavily, settling into place with quiet certainty. They erased her. A branch cracked somewhere in the distance. Lyra's head lifted slightly, her senses straining despite her weakness. The forest did not feel empty anymore. The silence had changed. Shifted. Watching. Waiting. And as the wind moved through the trees, carrying with it something ancient, something buried deep within the roots of the land itself, the truth began to surface. This place was not just a grave. It was something far older. Something that did not forget. But the forest remembered her. The forest did not move the way it should. Wind threaded through the branches, yet the leaves did not rustle in answer. The shadows stretched, long and unmoving, as though they had chosen their places and refused to shift. Even the air felt wrong, thick. Ancient, carrying something that pressed against Lyra's skin with quiet insistence. She tried to stand. Her arms trembled beneath her weight, strength slipping through her fingers as the ground tilted and swayed. Pain followed immediately, sharp and unforgiving, forcing her back down onto the cold earth. Blood seeped from the wounds she could no longer feel properly, soaking into the soil beneath her, dark and steady. Each breath came slower than the last. Her vision blurred at the edges, the world fading into fragments of shadow and dim light. The silence inside her, where her wolf had once been, spread further deeper, until it felt like it might swallow what little remained of her. This was the end. Not sudden. Not violent. Just quiet. Lyra's fingers curled weakly against the ground, pressing into the damp soil as though searching for something to hold onto. But there was nothing there, nothing familiar, nothing that belonged to her. Only earth. Cold. Ancient. Waiting. Her hand shifted slightly, dragging through the dirt, and then stopped. Something beneath her palm felt different. Not soft like soil. Not rough like stone. Smooth. Deliberate. Her breath caught, shallow and uneven, as she forced her eyes to focus. The ground beneath her was not empty. Hidden beneath layers of mud and time was something carved. Lines, symbols, markings worn by age but not erased. A pattern. Old. Older than anything she had ever seen. Her blood pooled over it, filling the grooves, tracing the lines as though it knew exactly where to go. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground answered. A low vibration pulsed beneath her hand, faint at first, almost imagined. The symbols beneath the mud began to glow, dimly, unevenly, reacting not to her presence but to something far more specific. Her blood. Lyra's breath hitched as the light spread, threading through the carved markings like veins coming to life. The earth itself seemed to inhale, drawing in the warmth that seeped from her wounds, drinking it in as though it had been waiting for this moment. Waiting for her. No, the thought flickered weakly through her fatting consciousness. Not fear, not yet, just confusion. The glow intensified. The ground beneath her hand burned, not painfully, but with a heat that reached deeper than skin, deeper than bone, sinking into something buried within her. Her body tensed, every muscle locking as the sensation spread, fast and unstoppable. It wasn't taking from her. It was giving something back. Her heartbeat stuttered, then surged. Once. Twice. Stronger. Louder. The silence inside her cracked. A sound tore through her chest, not a cry, not a gasp, but something raw, something pulled from a place she didn't know existed. The emptiness where her wolf had vanished trembled, then fractured completely as something else forced its way through. Not the wolf she had known. Something older. Something that did not ask for permission. Lyra's eyes snapped open. The world shifted instantly. The darkness sharpened, every shadow gaining shape, every movement becoming clear. She could hear it now, the forest, alive in a way it hadn't been before. The slow creak of branches, the distant pulse of roots beneath the earth, the faintest rustle of something watching from beyond the trees. And beneath it all, a rhythm. Deep, ancient, calling. Her body arched as the power surged through her, violent now, impossible to contain. It tore through her veins like fire, burning away the weakness, the silence, the limits that had defined her entire existence. Memories flooded in. Not hers. Never hers. Visions flashed behind her eyes, vast territories untouched by time, wolves larger than anything she had ever seen, their presence commanding not fear, but reverence. Voices echoed, layered over one another, speaking in a language she did not know yet somehow understood. Power. Dominance. Origin. She gasped, her fingers digging into the ground as the flood continued, overwhelming, relentless. She saw bloodlines rising, kingdoms forming, alphas bowing, not to strength alone, but to something greater. Something absolute. Her. No, someone before her. Someone whose blood now ran through her veins. The glow beneath her intensified, erupting outward in a sudden burst of light that tore through the forest floor. The ground trembled violently, cracks forming as energy surged upward, surrounding her in a force that bent the very air around it. Far beyond the clearing, wolves howled. Not in challenge. Not in fear. In recognition. The sound echoed through the trees, one after another, spreading outward like a signal carried across the land. The forest responded, the wind rising sharply, branches swaying in unison as though something ancient had awakened, and everything living felt it. Lyra's breathing steadied, but not because the pain had faded. Because it no longer mattered. Her eyes lifted slowly. They were no longer the same. Where once there had been softness, uncertainty, weakness, there was now something else entirely, something sharper, something deeper, something that held the weight of everything that had come before. Everything that had been lost. Everything that had returned. A voice rose within her, not spoken aloud, not heard with her ears, but felt, clear and undeniable. You are not Omega. The words settled into her, locking into place as though they had always been there, waiting to be remembered. You are the last of the first alphas. The truth did not shock her. It fit. Perfectly. As though every moment of her life had been leading to this one point, this awakening, this return, this reclaiming of something that had never truly been gone. The power within her stabilized, no longer chaotic, no longer uncontrolled. It settled into her bones, her blood, her breath, becoming part of her in a way that felt inevitable. Natural. Lyra pushed herself upright. Not slowly. Not with effort. But with certainty. The wounds that had once weakened her no longer held the same weight. The exhaustion that had dragged her toward death had vanished completely, replaced by something far stronger, far more enduring. She stood. The forest stilled. Not in silence. In acknowledgement. Somewhere in the distance, another howl rose, lower this time, deeper, carrying a tone that was unmistakable. Submission. Lyra's gaze lifted toward the direction it came from, her expression unreadable, her presence shifting the air itself. She did not need to test her strength. She could feel it. Everywhere. In the ground beneath her feet. In the wind that moved at her back. In the blood that no longer felt like her own. And far beyond the forest, beyond the borders she had been cast out of, beyond the walls that had once confined her. Something else stirred. Something that would soon realize what had changed. Lyra took a step forward. Then another. No hesitation. No doubt. Because the girl they had abandoned in the forest no longer existed. And the pack that cast her out just made their greatest mistake. By the time Lyra reached the edge of the pack's territory, the night had changed. Or perhaps she had. The forest behind her no longer felt like a place of exile. It stood still, quiet, as though it had already given her everything she needed. The darkness that once threatened to consume her now moved in rhythm with her steps, parting without resistance, guiding rather than hiding. Ahead, the invisible boundary of the pack's land, waited. For years, she had crossed that line with lowered eyes and careful steps, aware of every rule, every expectation, every consequence of stepping out of place. This time, she didn't slow down. The moment her foot crossed into the territory, the air shifted. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. It spread outward like a ripple, invisible yet undeniable, pressing into the ground, into the trees, into every living thing within range. The pack's presence, once overwhelming, suffocating in its hierarchy, faltered under something new. Something stronger. Lyra didn't stop walking. The first to notice were the patrol guards. They stood at the outer edge, positioned as always, their posture relaxed in the quiet of a night they expected to pass without incident. One of them turned, sensing movement, his gaze landing on her with casual disinterest, until it didn't. His expression changed instantly. Confusion flickered first, sharp and unexpected. Then tension followed, his body stiffening as something unseen pressed against him, forcing awareness where there had been none before. Who? The word died before it fully formed. Lyra stepped closer. The distance between them closed, and with it, the pressure intensified. It wasn't something visible, not something that could be named easily, but it was there, heavy, undeniable. Coiling around the air like a force that did not ask for permission to exist. The second guard shifted uneasily. Why does it feel like? He didn't finish either. Because they both felt it. Their instincts recognized something their minds could not yet understand. Power. Not borrowed. Not granted. Innate. Lyra's gaze passed over them without pause, without acknowledgement, as though they were no longer obstacles worth considering. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to prove anything. Her presence did it for her. One of them stepped back. Then the other. Not out of respect. Not yet. Out of something far closer to instinct. Lyra walked past them. Into the pack. The deeper she moved, the more noticeable it became. Conversations faltered. Movements slowed. Eyes turned, one by one, drawn toward something they could not ignore. At first, it was confusion. Then discomfort. Then something far more dangerous. Recognition without understanding. Omegas were the first to lower their gazes, stepping aside instinctively as she passed, their bodies reacting before their minds could question why. Betas followed, their posture stiffening, their expressions tightening as though resisting something that pressed against them from all sides. The alphas. They struggled. Lyra felt it. The resistance. The way their instincts pushed back, refusing to yield, refusing to acknowledge anything that challenged their dominance. But even that resistance wavered as she drew closer, as the weight of what she carried settled over them. One alpha stood in her path, his expression hard, his stance firm. Stop. The command came automatically, the kind he had given 100 times before, the kind that had never been questioned. Lyra didn't stop. His jaw tightened. I said. He faltered. Not because he chose to. Because his body betrayed him. The force pressing against him grew heavier, sharper, forcing his breath to hitch, forcing his muscles to tense in ways he couldn't control. His feet remained planted, but only just. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the cold, his instincts screaming something he refused to accept. Lyra stopped in front of him. Not out of obedience. Out of choice. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she tilted her head slightly, her gaze locking onto his. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was indifferent. The alpha's breath stuttered. His knees trembled, just once, barely noticeable, but enough. Enough to crack the illusion of control he had built around himself. Lyra didn't touch him. She didn't need to. The pressure shifted. Focused. Directed. And suddenly, it wasn't the air weighing him down. It was her. He dropped. Not fully, not yet, but enough that everyone watching saw it. Saw the moment his dominance broke. A ripple moved through the gathering crowd, whispers rising, sharp and uncertain. What is happening? Why can't he? Why does she feel? The words hung unfinished, fear threading through them. Lyra stepped past him, leaving him there, shaken, breathing unevenly, no longer certain of where he stood. She didn't look back, because there were others. Faces she recognized, voices she remembered. The ones who had laughed, the ones who had pushed her, insulted her, reduced her to something less than nothing. They stood together now, their earlier confidence gone, replaced by something far more fragile. One of them stepped forward, attempting to recover what had already slipped away. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it once held. Lyra stopped again, turned slowly, met his gaze. Silence stretched between them, heavy and unyielding. Then she took a single step closer. The effect was immediate. His breath caught, his posture faltering as the same invisible force pressed against him, stronger this time, more precise. He tried to hold his ground, tried to maintain the image of control he had always relied on. It didn't hold. His shoulders dipped. His gaze flickered. Lowered. Not fully, but enough. Lyra's expression didn't change. "You remember me," she said, her voice calm, steady, carrying more weight than it should have. He swallowed hard. "You were." "I was nothing," she finished for him. The words didn't carry bitterness. They carried truth. And something else. Finality. The pressure increased just slightly, not enough to break him completely, not enough to humiliate him beyond repair, but enough to make a point that could not be ignored. Then she released it. Just like that. The weight vanished. The air cleared. And the alpha stumbled back, catching himself just before he could fall. Lyra turned away. She didn't need to do more. They understood. Every single one of them. This wasn't revenge driven by anger. It was something far more controlled, far more absolute. A shift. A reordering. The pack was no longer what it had been. And neither was she. At the center of the territory, high above the courtyard, a presence stirred. Unseen. Unannounced. But aware. Lyra continued forward, her steps steady, her gaze fixed ahead, as the whispers behind her grew louder, more frantic, more uncertain. Because what they were witnessing should not have been possible, and somewhere beyond their understanding, beyond their reach. Someone far more powerful was watching. The shift in the pack did not remain contained within its borders. Power like Lyra's could not be hidden or ignored, because it moved through the very fabric of what bound wolves together. It traveled through the earth beneath their feet, through the air they breathed, and through every instinct that tied one wolf to another. It carried a signal that did not belong to rank or territory, but to something far older. And somewhere far beyond the reach of her pack, someone felt it. At first, it came as a distant pressure, faint enough to be dismissed by those who did not understand it. But within seconds, that pressure grew into something undeniable, something that demanded attention whether it was welcomed or not. Lyra felt it before anyone else. She had just stepped into the center of the courtyard, the same place where she had once been humiliated and stripped of dignity, when the air shifted again. This time, it did not bend to her presence. Instead, it met her with equal force, pressing back in a way that made it clear she was no longer the only one who carried something extraordinary. Her steps slowed, not out of fear, but out of awareness. For the first time since returning, she allowed herself to pause and truly feel what was approaching. Around her, the pack reacted instantly. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, and bodies stiffened as if caught in an invisible grip. Heads turned in the same direction, drawn by instinct rather than choice, because whatever was coming could not be ignored. Then the weight of it hit them. It was not simply power. It was authority in its purest form, heavy and commanding, pressing down on every wolf present with an intensity that demanded submission. One after another, they dropped to their knees. Alphas who had never bowed to anyone within their territory found themselves unable to remain standing. Betas lowered their heads without resistance, and omegas sank to the ground as though their bodies had no strength left to resist what they were feeling. A single name passed through the courtyard in a hushed, trembling whisper. The Alpha King. He did not need to announce himself. The moment he stepped into view, it became obvious to everyone present that he stood above them all. Ronan moved with a calm, deliberate confidence that did not need to prove itself. Every step carried the quiet certainty of someone who had never doubted his position, someone whose authority had never been challenged in a way that mattered. His presence did not ask for attention, it claimed it completely. The very space around him seemed to adjust, as though even the ground beneath his feet recognized him. His gaze swept across the courtyard, taking in the sight of wolves kneeling in submission, their heads lowered, their bodies still. Then his attention shifted. It landed on the one person who had not moved. Lyra remained exactly where she was, standing upright while everyone else bowed around her. She did not lower her gaze, and she made no attempt to follow the unspoken command that had forced everyone else to their knees. The tension that followed was immediate and sharp. A few wolves risked lifting their eyes just enough to confirm what they were sensing, and disbelief spread quickly across their faces. She had not bowed. She had not even tried. The silence that settled over the courtyard felt heavier than before, stretched thin by anticipation. Ronan took a step closer, then another, closing the distance between them with slow, measured movements. The force of his presence intensified as he approached, pressing outward in a way that should have forced her down, just as it had forced everyone else. But Lyra did not move. She held his gaze steadily, without hesitation or fear. There was no defiance in her expression, no need to challenge him openly, yet there was something in her composure that made it clear she would not yield simply because she was expected to. That quiet certainty made her far more dangerous than open rebellion ever could. When he stopped a few steps away from her, the space between them felt charged with something neither of them needed to name. The entire pack remained frozen, caught in a moment that felt as though it balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Ronan studied her carefully, his attention no longer casual or detached. He looked at her as though he were searching for something hidden beneath the surface, something that could not be explained by what he had been told or what he expected to find. His expression remained controlled, but there was a subtle shift in his eyes that suggested he had already begun to understand that she was not what she appeared to be. "You don't bow," he said, his voice calm but carrying enough weight to reach every corner of the courtyard without effort. There was a brief pause before he added, "That is interesting." The words were simple, but they carried an undercurrent that made them anything but casual. Lyra did not respond immediately. She did not feel the need to fill the silence, because what existed between them did not rely on spoken words. There was already something forming, something that neither of them could ignore, threading through her in a way that felt unfamiliar yet impossible to deny. It was not her old wolf that reacted. It was something deeper, something older. Ronan felt it as well, and this time it showed in the slight adjustment of his posture and the sharpened focus in his gaze. What had begun as curiosity had shifted into something far more serious, something that demanded his full attention. The atmosphere between them changed again, no longer heavy but tense, as though charged with energy waiting to be released. Lyra took a step forward, closing the distance between them slightly. The movement was not an act of submission, nor was it a challenge. It was a quiet acknowledgement of what was happening, of the connection neither of them could deny. For a moment, everything else seemed to fall away. The pack, the hierarchy, the past that had led them to this point, all faded into the background, leaving only the space between them and the pull that continued to grow stronger. It was not overwhelming or chaotic. It was precise and deliberate, as though something ancient had aligned perfectly after being separated for far too long. Ronan's gaze shifted briefly, taking in the details that marked her transformation, before returning to her eyes with renewed intensity. "You are not what they believe you to be," he said, his voice quieter now but no less certain. It was not a question, and it did not require an answer. Lyra felt the connection pulse again, stronger than before, clearer in a way that left no room for doubt. For the first time since her awakening, something about it unsettled her, not because it was weak, but because it matched her in a way she had not expected. Ronan recognized it as well, and this time the realization was impossible to hide completely. It showed in the slight shift of his breathing, in the way his focus sharpened as the truth began to take shape in his mind. Around them, the pack remained silent, unable to fully understand what they were witnessing, yet aware that it was something far beyond the normal order of things. Then, from across the courtyard, another presence reacted. Kale had arrived too late to stop her return, and far too late to undo what had already begun. But he had not missed everything. His gaze locked onto Lyra, and confusion struck immediately, followed by disbelief as he took in the way she stood, the way she held herself, the way the pack responded to her. Then something else hit him. Something far worse. The bond he had once rejected did not feel the same anymore. It had not disappeared completely, but it no longer felt like something that belonged to him. It had shifted, changed into something distant and unrecognizable. His chest tightened as his eyes moved from Lyra to Ronan, and in that moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. The connection between them was not imagined. It was real, stronger than anything he had cast aside. The certainty he once carried drained from his expression, replaced by something cold and unsettling as realization took hold. The Omega he had rejected had never truly been meant for him. And now, she stood connected to someone he could never hope to surpass. Kale did not speak, because there were no words that could change what he now understood. The truth settled heavily in his chest, sharp and unforgiving. What he had discarded, without hesitation, had not been broken. It had been claimed. By someone far beyond his reach. Kale's gaze lingered on her longer than it should have, and for the first time, hesitation crept into his posture. He had always believed he understood power, control, and dominance. He had always believed that rejecting her had been the correct choice, that an Omega like Lyra would never rise above her place. But standing there now, seeing the undeniable force she radiated, every certainty he had clung to began to crumble. The mate bond, once severed by his rejection, flickered unbidden. A whisper of connection threaded through him, stirring memories and instincts he had tried to bury. It was subtle at first, almost easy to ignore, but the longer he looked at her, the more it demanded his attention. That bond had not died. It had waited, hidden, quiet, patient. And now it was resurfacing, and it carried a weight that made his chest tighten in a way he had never experienced before. Lyra, on the other hand, stood firmly, the storm of her past and present swirling inside her like wildfire. She could feel the faint pulse of recognition from Kale, the one she had once mourned, the one who had rejected her so publicly, but it was nothing compared to the pull she now felt toward Ronan. Each heartbeat, each surge of power in her veins, reminded her that she was no longer the weak Omega who had been cast aside. She had become something more, far more. Her eyes flicked between the two alphas, and in that split second, every memory of humiliation clashed with the intoxicating certainty of her new identity. Her past demanded acknowledgement, her present demanded control, and her future demanded choice. The tension hung heavy in the courtyard, tangible, pressing on everyone who dared to witness it. Kale's voice, barely a whisper but filled with regret, finally broke the silence. You rejected me when I had no idea who you were, and now you remember me." The words cut through the air like a knife, a reminder of every moment he had underestimated her, every cruel glance, every act of dismissal. But Lyra did not answer immediately. She did not need to. Her power spoke for her in every shift of her posture, in every subtle spark of her energy radiating outward, in the unshakable confidence she carried. And yet, even as Kale faltered under the weight of his own realization, the truth remained that her evolution was far from complete. Every step she had taken since the forest had been only the beginning. Every surge of power she had felt was a whisper of the force that still lived inside her, a force that was growing, transforming, and bending the very world around her to acknowledge it. The courtyard held its breath, caught between fear, awe, and anticipation. Every wolf present could feel it, and none dared look away. For Lyra, the choice was clear, but the consequences were only beginning to ripple outward. Her power was still evolving, and the pack, and everyone in it, would soon understand that what they had witnessed so far was only the beginning. Lyra's eyes glowed faintly, a pulse of energy radiating through her as the truth she had only begun to sense revealed itself in stark clarity. The air around her thickened, as though the forest, the pack, and even time itself were leaning in to witness what was about to be unveiled. This was no ordinary Omega. This was no mere survivor of cruelty and rejection. She carried something far older, far more dangerous than anyone present could understand. The stories whispered in shadows, the ones dismissed as legends, began to crystallize in her mind. Her bloodline was ancient, predating the current pack hierarchy, predating even the oldest alphas who had ruled with arrogance and fear. She was a descendant of the original alpha bloodline, a line of rulers who had once commanded loyalty, respect, and fear across territories far larger than any single pack. Her family had been betrayed, erased from history, their power stolen and rewritten by those who now called themselves kings. Every memory, every pulse of her newfound energy carried fragments of that legacy. She could feel it in her bones, in the rhythm of her heartbeat, in the subtle shiver of the air around her. The bond that connected her to her ancestors thrummed beneath her skin. It was not just strength, it was authority, wisdom, and a claim that could not be ignored. The pack's murmurs rose into frightened whispers as realization began to creep into their minds. Even Kale, still reeling from the shift in the bond between them, felt the weight of it, though he did not yet comprehend its full magnitude. Ronan's eyes narrowed, perception sharpening as he sensed the depth of power beneath her calm exterior. Her voice, steady but carrying the authority of centuries, broke the stunned silence. "The blood you carry," she said, letting the words ripple through the courtyard like fire, once ruled them all. Shock washed over every wolf present. Eyes widened. Knees trembled. Even the Alpha King himself felt the tremor of her declaration reverberate through the invisible hierarchy that had governed their world for generations. This revelation was more than a personal vendetta. It was a reclamation, a declaration that the corrupt system built on betrayal and fear was no longer unchallenged. The pack had cast her aside, tried to erase her, but they had underestimated what it meant to awaken the power of a bloodline that had been thought extinct. And yet, as the weight of her identity settled into place, a cold awareness prickled at the edges of her consciousness. This power, this legacy, had enemies, forces that had survived centuries, who had watched her ancestors fall and would stop at nothing to see the same fate befall her. Her heart hardened and her senses sharpened. She was no longer the powerless Omega who had suffered humiliation, rejection, and abandonment. She was something far greater. But the shadows whispered a warning that only she could hear. Someone was already moving to strike. Someone intent on ensuring that this reclamation of power would never come to fruition. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath along with her, and for a moment, all that existed was the electric tension between revelation and danger. Lyra's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter with the fire of her awakening. Her bloodline demanded more than vengeance. It demanded survival. And she would not fail. But someone wanted her dead again. The tension in the courtyard had reached a breaking point. Every wolf present could feel the weight of history pressing down on them, and yet the audacity of the pack leaders dared to rise against it. Their faces were masks of arrogance, carefully painted over the fear that churned beneath. They had underestimated her once, and they were about to regret it. One by one, the pack elders stepped forward, their voices loud and commanding, trying to impose authority that no longer existed. "You will submit," they barked. You are nothing more than an Omega pretending to be powerful. Kneel now or face the consequences." The words would have been enough to make anyone else falter. Anyone else would have been broken by the weight of centuries of expectation, by the fear of defying the hierarchy they had been taught to respect. But Lyra did not falter. She did not hesitate. She did not even blink. Her presence expanded, a tangible force that pressed against the air itself. Her eyes glowed with the fire of her ancestors. Every muscle in her body radiated strength. Every instinct screamed dominance. The first elder lunged forward, trying to intimidate her with gestures and threats. Lyra's reaction was effortless. She raised a hand, a subtle motion, and the elder's charge faltered. His knees buckled as if invisible chains gripped him, forcing him down. The pack gasped. Then another moved, and another. Each attempt to suppress her power collapsed instantly under the sheer force of her awakened bloodline. Wolves who had once ruled with arrogance found themselves powerless, helpless before the authority she now embodied. Lyra walked slowly through the courtyard, her steps measured, deliberate. With every movement, former tormentors froze, realizing too late that they were no longer in control. The low-level abusers who had laughed at her, scorned her, forced her to crawl, they now trembled at the sound of her name, their fear sharp and immediate. "You made me crawl," she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard, clear and commanding. "You humiliated me, you laughed at me, you thought you could erase me, but now—" Her eyes swept over every wolf forced to their knees before her. "Now you kneel." The courtyard was silent except for the sound of trembling bodies hitting the ground. One by one, they bowed in submission, eyes lowered in shame and recognition. The public humiliation of those who had once tormented her was complete, a moment of sweet, undeniable vindication that made every pulse of her power feel sharper, more alive. Even Kale, still caught between awe and regret, could not look away. He realized with piercing clarity that the Omega he had cast aside was no longer the same. She had become everything he had failed to see, and the balance of the pack had shifted irreversibly. But even as the courtyard absorbed the enormity of her dominance, the presence of another authority lingered, a gaze that was calm, calculating, and impossibly powerful. The Alpha King, Ronan, remained standing, watching, silent. And when he finally spoke, his words cut through the tension like a blade, carrying weight beyond anything the pack had just witnessed. "You've made them kneel," he said, his voice low, measured, and commanding. "But there is one question that remains." Lyra's pulse quickened, and the entire pack leaned in, caught between fear, awe, and anticipation. Whatever he asked next would change everything. The courtyard was charged with a silence so heavy it felt like the world itself had paused to witness what was about to unfold. Lyra stood at the center, every inch of her radiating authority, every pulse of her being a testament to the journey that had brought her here. The pack leaders still knelt, their pride shattered, their dominance broken, and yet the moment was far from over. Ronan stepped forward, his presence calm but undeniably commanding, and for the first time he spoke directly to her. "Lyra," he said, voice low and deliberate, carrying the weight of both respect and desire, "you have awakened a power thought lost to time. You have reclaimed what was stolen and shown them the truth. I offer you an alliance, a bond, not as a subordinate, not as a pawn, but as an equal. Together, we can reshape this pack and everything beyond it." His gaze held hers, steady and intense, a mixture of challenge and invitation that made her pulse quicken. It was an offer that no one else could make, a recognition of her strength and a promise of something far more than she had ever been allowed to dream. Kale, however, was a different storm. The regret in his eyes was raw and unfiltered. "Lyra," he whispered, voice hoarse with emotion, "I see now what I discarded. I begged for you then, and I beg for you now if there is any part of me that can make amends." His words trembled, heavy with shame, desire, and longing. But she did not answer immediately. She did not need to. Her power had grown too much to be swayed by desperation alone. In that moment, every choice she had made, every trial she had endured, every surge of awakening coursed through her veins. The echoes of her past pain collided with the promise of her future, and she realized the truth of what she had become. She was no longer the timid Omega who had been broken, humiliated, and cast aside. That girl had died in the forest, and from her ashes, something far greater had risen. Her eyes swept across both men, the one who represented raw authority, the one who symbolized past ties and old bonds, and then settled within herself. She inhaled deeply, feeling the fire of her bloodline, the strength of her independence, and the undeniable pull of possibility. "I am not the Omega you broke," she said, her voice ringing clear across the courtyard, strong and unwavering. "I am the Alpha you created." Every wolf froze at her words, and even the wind seemed to pause, carrying the weight of her declaration. The tension rippled outward, suspense wrapping around every heart and every gaze. The choice she would make next, between power, love, and independence, was no longer just hers. It would reshape the hierarchy, the pack, and the very bonds that had been forged and broken over centuries. And as she lifted her chin, eyes blazing with certainty and promise, the air crackled with anticipation, because her answer would change everything. The courtyard exhaled as if the world itself had been holding its breath, but Lyra barely noticed. Her eyes still glimmered with the fire of triumph, the pulse of her awakening resonating through every heartbeat, every instinct. The pack had seen her power, her dominance, and her rightful place as an alpha, and yet, even in that moment of victory, something subtle shifted in the air. A chill brushed through the space around her, faint at first, almost imperceptible, yet it carried a weight that made the hairs on her arms rise. It was a presence she had not felt before, a shadow, distant but undeniably real, like a heartbeat echoing in the distance, faint yet insistent. Something ancient stirred, something that mirrored her own strength, her own bloodline. Lyra's instincts sharpened instantly. She turned slowly, senses flaring, every muscle coiled and ready. Her gaze scanned the perimeter of the courtyard, the tree line, the dark corners where shadows pooled, but she saw nothing. Yet the sense of being watched, of being tested, did not fade. It only grew heavier, more insistent. The whisper came then, barely audible, threading itself through the wind and the rustling leaves. "She's not the only one." The words were simple, yet they carried a promise and a threat that sent a shiver of anticipation through her. The moment of triumph was no longer final. The world had just expanded, the stakes had just multiplied, and the story was far from over. Lyra's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, and her eyes burned brighter than ever. Whatever, or whoever, awaited, she was ready. The pack, frozen and uncertain, could feel it too. The future was no longer predictable, and every heartbeat now counted. And somewhere in that tense silence, the first spark of the next battle ignited.